Are you ready for the word?
Yes, sir.
Turn to John 10. I closed last week by stating that I wanted to look at verses that some biblical cosmologists use to prove or to try to prove a fixed earth with a dome. Verses that I don't think should be used for that purpose. However, after I got to digging into it, I realized I couldn't do that in one session. So I'm going to move on. It's time to move on. When prompted, and if prompted, we'll come back to that subject for another day. Today we're going to be in John chapter 10, and I want to start reading in verse 1. Verily I say to you, he that enters not by the door into the sheepfold, but climbs up some other way, the same is a thief and a robber. But he that enters in by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the porter opens, and the sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. Later you'll find Yeshua identifying himself as both the shepherd and the door. He is the door and he is the shepherd. Verse 4, and when he puts forth his own sheep, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. And a stranger will they not follow, but will flee from him, for they know not the voice of strangers. Drop down to verse 22. And it was at Jerusalem, the feast of the dedication, and it was winter. Now, I tell you something you already know, but something that you were never told in Sunday school, and that is that verse 22 is a reference to Hanukkah. The Hebrew word for dedication is Hanukkah, or Hanukkah, I think, is more proper pronunciation of it, but our Americanized version of it is Hanukkah. So here in verse 22, we have Yeshua entering into the temple during the celebration of Hanukkah. But let's read on now. Verse 23. And Yeshua walked in the temple in Solomon's porch. Then came the Jews round about him and said unto him, How long do you make us to doubt? If you be the Messiah, tell us plainly. Yeshua answered them, I told you, and you believe not. The works that I do in my Father's name, they bear witness of me. But you believe not, because you are not of my sheep, as I said unto you. So, in the first 4 verses, he was talking about sheep, and even in the verses after that. But in the first 4 verses, he was talking about sheep, and so is he here talking about sheep. So, the logical conclusion is that the first 21 verses are in the same context as verses 22 and following, and that is they're connected to this observance of the Feast of Dedication in Jerusalem. Verse 27, My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. And I give unto them eternal life, and they shall never perish, neither shall any man pluck them out of my hand. My Father gave them me is greater than all, which gave them me is greater than all, and no man is able to pluck them out of my Father's hand. I and my Father are one. Listen to the terminology there. No man shall pluck them out of my hand. Pluck's not a good translation. You pluck grapes, and you pluck figs, and you pluck apples. We're not talking about apples, grapes, or figs. We're talking about sheep. So the Greek word used here means to seize something or to take it by force. So Yeshua said, no man shall take my sheep by force. They'll not be able to seize them and take them away from me. And my Father, he said, is greater than me, and he's the one who gave me these sheep. So no one's going to be able to take by force my sheep away from him either. He gave them to me. You can't take them away from me, and you certainly can't take them away from him. And this morning I want us to look closely at Yeshua's main points that he makes here about him and his sheep. Point number one is in the first 21 verses, and it is this: he's not only our shepherd, he's our door. That is, he's not only our protector and provider, which would be seen in the word shepherd. He is our protector, he is our provider, but not only is he those things, as the good shepherd, he's also our access. He's the door. He's the one who gives us access to the Father. He's the one that gives us access to eternal life. He's the one that gives us access to truth. He's the one that gives us access to wisdom. He's the one that gives us access to forgiveness. He's the one that gives us access to significance. Unless we're connected to him and serving him in our life has no significance. So he is our access to those things. The next point made by Yeshua in these verses is his sheep hear his voice, they know his voice, and they follow him. When you see people being led astray, it's because they don't know his voice. Right. If they knew his voice, they wouldn't get led astray. Any Messiah that's telling people to forsake any part of Yahweh's Torah is not the Messiah, is not the true Messiah or the true shepherd. Yeshua's sheep know his voice and follow him. Which brings us to point number 3. Yeshua said, and a stranger they will not follow. Now keep that in mind, because we're going to come back to that one. It's going to be the main point that we focus on today, but I wanted to go ahead and put it out there. Point number 3 is a stranger they will not follow, but let's also look at point number 4. Point number 4 is there will be attempts to take sheep from Messiah by force. Why would he say that no man can take them by force if he didn't foresee that people are going to try? There are going to be attempts to take them by force. There's no need to bring that up if that's not a possibility, right? He sees that there will be men who will attempt to take his sheep, but Messiah says this: no man's able to take them by force from my hand. So put number 3 and number 4 together. Messiah said, a stranger they will not follow, and no man can take them by force from my hand. Those two things go hand in hand. If one looks like, if there is one that looks like his sheep and attempts to bleat like his sheep occasionally, but follows a stranger, get that now. They look like a sheep, they'll even bleat like a sheep, but they follow a stranger, he says, that's not my sheep, because my sheep will not follow a stranger. And his sheep, he says, cannot be taken away. Why can his sheep not be taken away? His sheep know his voice. His sheep would never follow a stranger, and no stranger is powerful enough to take them by force. So if someone is taken away, they were never one of his sheep to begin with. That's the point. If they are taken away and they follow somebody else, they never were one of his, because he said, my sheep won't do that. John, in his epistle, said it this way, and you have to wonder if he had this teaching in mind. He is penning John chapter 10, but in his epistle in 1 John 2, he said it this way. Little children, and I'm reading 1 John 2:18. Little children, it is the last time, and as you have heard that Antichrist shall come, even now are there many Antichrists, whereby we know that it is the last time. What's an Antichrist? We know there's one coming in the last days, the Antichrist. But John said there are many Antichrists among us now, right? So even now are there many Antichrists. What's Antichrist?
Against the Messiah.
Against, opposed to, opposite of. There are many who are opposite of or opposed to the Messiah. Strong's dictionary puts it this way: opponents of the Messiah. Thayer's Greek dictionary uses the word adversaries. There are many adversaries of the Messiah. So now, with that in mind, listen closely to John's next statement. These adversaries of the Messiah, these opponents of the Messiah, 1 John 2:19, they went out from us. They were among us, but these Antichrist, adversaries of Messiah, went out from us. They were with us for a while. They pretended to be a part of us for a while, but eventually they followed a stranger. Eventually somebody else's voice appealed to them. They weren't taken by force. They chose to go. They claimed to still serve and follow the Messiah, but that's not so. They cannot believe what they now believe and do what they now do and be serving the true Messiah. They're serving one who is an adversary of the Messiah. 1 John 2:19, they went out from us, but they were not of us. That's the same thing Yeshua said in John 10. My sheep won't do that. And here John says, they were in among us, they looked like us, but they went out from us because they never were really of us. For if they had been of us, they no doubt would have continued with us, but they went out that they might be made manifest that they were not all of us. So go back to John 10. I think you're still there, but let's go back to John 10. And we see John's making the same point in his epistle that is recorded, that he recorded Messiah made in John 10. And that point being this: if somebody leaves the fold, they're demonstrated that they never were one of Yeshua's sheep, because Yeshua's sheep would never follow a stranger. So if a sheep is following a stranger, it wasn't one of his sheep. I keep repeating that, but it's necessary. As I said, I want to focus on point 3 made in verse 5. John 10, verse 5. And a stranger will they not follow, but will flee from him, for they know not the voice of strangers. Not only will they not follow him, when they hear him, they run. They flee, they get away. Now, the impact of those words, the depth of meaning of those words cannot be understood until you set them in their context, and the context is the Feast of Dedication. He's at the temple, he's in Jerusalem, it's winter, it is the Feast of Dedication, and that's when he says this stuff. Let me demonstrate to you what I mean. The events that created the need for Hanukkah are recorded in 1st and 2nd Maccabees. So I'm going to read to you from 1st Maccabees the beginning of the events that led up to the desolation and the destruction that brought about the need for the Maccabees. So I'm reading out of the complete 54-book Apocrypha. I used to have an older one that didn't have that many in it, but Glenn showed me that they had revised it. And so I'm going to be reading to you out of it. I'm going to be reading from 1 Maccabees chapter 1. I'm going to start reading in verse 10. So listen closely. And there came out of them, and them being a long list of Greek kings who followed Alexander the Great. After Alexander the Great died, several kings followed him. So there came out of them a sinful root, Antiochus Epiphanes, son of Antiochus the king, who had been a hostage at Rome, and he reigned in the 137th year of the kingdom of the Greeks. In those days came there out of Israel transgressors of the law. So let's pause for a minute and listen to what he just said. He's talking about Antiochus Epiphanes and what the Greeks are doing, but then he puts this in there. In those days came there out of Israel, not out of the Greeks, not out of Antiochus, but out of Israel, transgressors of the law, and persuaded many, saying, let us go and make a covenant with the nations that are round about us. For since we were parted from them, many evils have befallen us. And the saying was good in their eyes. They listened, and they liked what they heard. Certain of the people were forward and went to the king, and he gave them license to do after the ordinances of the nations. And they built a place of exercise in Jerusalem, according to the laws of the nations. And they made themselves uncircumcised, and they forsook the holy covenant, and they joined themselves to the nations, and they sold themselves to do evil. Antiochus Epiphanes was a stranger. He's an evil Greek king, hell-bent on making the whole world Greek. And the only way he can do that is to stamp out the worship of the true Elohim. The only way he can make the whole world Greek is to eliminate truth. The only way he can accomplish this is to destroy Torah and all who call upon Yahweh. And there were many in Israel who listened to the voice of this stranger. They determined that being Torah observant was too costly. They determined that they were better off when they were coexisting with the nations around them. They determined that mixing, mingling, and compromise were the only paths to to peace and joy. That's the only option they had to ever have peace and ever have joy, was to mingle and to compromise. And so they went to the king, and verse 15 says, they sold themselves. They sold themselves to do evil. In order to do evil, they had to sell themselves. Which begs the question, what is your price tag? Their price tag was clear. Their price tag was, we'll become whoever you want us to be. Just stop hating us and persecuting us. We'll be Greek. We'll stop circumcising. We'll stop keeping the Sabbath. We'll eat that which is unclean. We'll forsake the feast. We'll participate in the festivals associated with Zeus and Apollo. And any other Elohim you require, we'll do all of that. Just stop persecuting us. They sold themselves in order to do the evil things required they had to do. Now put that in the context of John 10. Yeshua is telling us that those who did what is recorded in 1 Maccabees verses 10 through 15 were not the true people of Yahweh. Had they been the true people of Yahweh, they never could have done that, no matter how bad the persecution had become. Because Yeshua said, a stranger they will not follow, but these followed a stranger. They did what they were told to do. That's the message of John chapter 10. When Yeshua tells us that his sheep will not follow a stranger, he's telling us the Hanukkah story. He's telling us that his sheep, his true sheep, cannot be taken by threat or force, neither will they voluntarily listen to or follow the demands of a stranger, no matter how powerful that stranger is. Hang in here with me now. Let's mine the rich treasure here out of John chapter 10. Yeshua's comments in John 10 are not meek and gentle comments out of a devotional book meant to make us feel all warm and fuzzy. They're meant to challenge us. They're serious and they're strong. He's telling us that if we are truly His sheep, no matter what the threat, no matter what we end up losing, no matter what the punishment is, no matter how hard it gets, no matter, a stranger we're not going to follow. We're not going to compromise at the voice of a stranger to evade any kind of discomfort just to evade the discomfort. We're going to stay true to the Messiah. A stranger they will not follow. Now understand that stranger might be a government who wants to control everything you say and do. A stranger might be a co-worker who wants you to stop shining the light on their pagan practices. A stranger might be a spouse or family member who isn't willing to walk the narrow path that you've chosen. There are many strangers out there. What makes them a stranger? What do we mean by stranger? What makes somebody a stranger? They are strangers because they are strangers to what you have discovered, to what you have seen, to what you have experienced, to the joy you have found in keeping Torah, to the joy you have found in obedience, to the joy you have found in the feast, to the joy you have found in forsaking man's traditions, man's doctrines, man's commandments. They are strangers to the joy you have found in forsaking Christmas and Easter and Halloween and the peace that came from it, and the joy you have found in walking away from Sunday worship. These strangers will try to exert influence over you. And sadly, many turn back and give in to the beckoning of these strangers. They sell themselves so they can go back and fit in and have peace again with these strangers. Listen to Yeshua. My sheep hear my voice, and a stranger they will not follow. His true sheep never turn back no matter how difficult the journey becomes. Let's read more out of 1 Maccabees. I want to pick up reading now in verse 20. If I knew I was going to read so much, I'd have tried to find copies for you to read along, but you're good listeners, aren't you? All right, listen to verse 20. And Antiochus, after he had struck Egypt, returned in 143rd year and went up against Israel and Jerusalem with a great multitude, and entered presumptuously into the sanctuary, and took the golden altar and the candlestick of the light, and all that pertained to that, and the table of the bread of the presentation, and the cups to pour with, and the bowls, and the golden censers, and the veil, and the crowns, and the adorning of gold, which was on the face of the temple, and he peeled it all off. And he took the silver and the gold and the precious vessels, and he took the hidden treasures which he found. And when he had taken all, he went away into his own land, and he made a great slaughter, and he spoke very presumptuously. All of this was foretold in Daniel chapter 7. We're reading about it in 1 Maccabees, but in Daniel chapter 7, Daniel foresees it and begins to speak it forth. And there came a great mourning on Israel in every place where they were, and the rulers and the elders groaned, the virgins and the young men were made feeble, and the beauty of the women was changed. Every bridegroom took up lamentation. She that sat in the marriage chamber was in heaviness, and the land was moved for the inhabitants thereof, and all the house of Jacob was clothed with shame. And after 2 full years, that would put us to 145 in the rule of the Greeks, after 2 full years, the king sent a chief collector of tribute to the cities of Judah. And he came to Jerusalem with a great multitude, that is, with a great army. And he spoke words of peace to them in subtlety. And they gave him credence. He said, I'm coming in peace. And they believed him. And he fell on the city suddenly, and he struck it very severely, and destroyed much people out of Israel. And he took the spoils of the city, and he set it on fire, and he pulled down the houses thereof, and the walls thereof on every side. And they led captive the women and the children and the cattle they took in possession. And they built the city of David with a great and strong wall, with strong towers, and it became to them a citadel. Yeah, citadel. And they put there a sinful nation, transgressors of the law, and they strengthened themselves therein. And they stored up arms and food, and gathering together the spoils of Jerusalem, they laid them up there. And they became a severe snare, and it became a place to lie in wait in against the sanctuary, and an evil adversary to Israel continually. And they shed innocent blood on every side of the sanctuary, and defiled the sanctuary. And the inhabitants of Jerusalem fled because of them, and she became a habitation of strangers, and she became strange to those who were born in her, and her children forsook her. Yeah, I'll stop right there. Listen to those words. Jerusalem became a stranger to those who were born in her, and her children forsook her. I've told you before, I love Hanukkah. The implications and the applications of this amazing story are deep treasures. It says, Jerusalem's children forsook her. Why did they forsake her? Well, we were told, because Antiochus filled the city with transgressors of the law. And these transgressors of the law strengthened themselves. We just read, it says they became a severe snare. That is, if you stayed in Jerusalem, you were going to become entangled in and partakers of their sins. You couldn't stay there and eventually not get drawn in to all of the things that were going on there. It is also said it became a place to lie in wait against the sanctuary. What does that mean? Well, here's what it means. Those who now occupied Jerusalem were sitting in wait so that they could attack anyone who dared to worship Yahweh correctly. Anyone who dared to try to hold to the strict observance of Torah was attacked with great fierceness. So I ask you, can you see the parallel? Let me ask it to you this way. Why are you here this morning? Why did you forsake the church? Was it not because it had become unrecognizable? It no longer held true to the Scriptures. It was filled with transgressors of the law who not only transgressed the law, but taught that it was necessary to abandon the law. Did their ways not become a snare that you were afraid might capture you and your family? Did they not begin to lie in wait for you? That is, did they not begin to look at you suspiciously so that they could leap upon you with fury and disdain if you dared to bring up what's written in the Scriptures instead of just going along with the program they presented? The church became unrecognizable as a place of true worship of Yahweh and true followers of Yeshua. It forsook the Sabbath and erected steeples. It forsook Torah and brought in Christmas trees, Easter egg hunts, and Halloween celebrations. It forsook Torah and began to have catfish fries and Easter ham dinners. How did it get that way? Because people began to follow the voice of a stranger who told them it was okay, who told them it was necessary, who told them there was more joy that way. Let me continue reading. I'm going to pick up 1 Maccabees chapter 1, verse 39. Her sanctuary was laid waste like a wilderness. Her feasts were turned into mourning, her Sabbaths into reproach, her honor into contempt. According to her glory, so was her dishonor multiplied, and her high estate was turned into mourning. And King Antiochus wrote to his whole kingdom that all should be one people. One world government. Yeah. One religion. Right? Yeah. Unity. And that each should forsake his own laws. And all the nations agreed according to the word of the king. And many of Israel consented to his worship. They said, yes, sir, king. And sacrificed to the idols and profaned the Sabbath. You know what that means, sacrifice to the idols and profane the Sabbath? They forsook the Sabbath to observe the day that he said you should worship, because you had to work on the Sabbath. There was another day set up to worship. You had to go that day. And they began, what did it say here? They began to sacrifice to his idols. That terminology just simply means they adopted his feast instead of the feast of Torah. They adopted his celebrations. Let me read on. And the king sent letters by the hand of messengers to Jerusalem and the cities of Judah, that they should follow laws strange to the land. In other words, you got to follow laws that are not in Torah. You got to forsake Torah and do what I'm telling you to do. They should forbid whole burnt offerings and sacrifice, and drink offerings in the sanctuary. They should profane the Sabbaths and the feast. They should pollute the sanctuary and those who were holy. And that they should build altars and temples and shrines for idols. You ought to put up a Christmas tree, because I said so. Same thing. They should sacrifice swine's flesh and unclean beast. They should leave their sons uncircumcised, and should make their souls abominable with all manner of uncleanness and profaneness. Listen to the terminology used there. You can't do everything that he's asking you to do without making your soul abominable. It is going to affect your soul. Your soul will become an abomination in the sight of Yahweh. So that they might forget the law and change all the ordinances. Again, go read Daniel 7. This is all prophesied, that he'll seek to change the times and the laws. And whoever will not do according to the word of the king, he will die. According to all these words wrote he to his whole kingdom, and he appointed overseers over all the people, and he commanded the cities of Judah to sacrifice city by city. And from the people were gathered together to them everyone that had forsaken the law, and they did evil things in every place of refuge which they had. And on the 15th day of Kislev, in the 145th year, they built an abomination of desolation on the altar, and in the cities of Judah on every side they built idol altars. And at the doors of the houses in the streets they burned incense, and they tore in pieces the scrolls of the law which they found, and set them on fire. And wherever was found with any a scroll of the covenant, and if any consented to the law, that is, if anybody was consenting to keep Torah, the king's sentence delivered him to death. So did they in their might to Israel, to those that were found month by month in the cities. And on the 25th day of the month, they sacrificed on the altar, and the women that had circumcised their children, they put to death according to the command, and they hanged their babies about their necks and destroyed their houses and those who had circumcised them. So the women who allowed it to be done, the babies and the circumcisers were all destroyed. The 25th day of Kislev, you'll find that that's the day they committed this abomination of desolation as foretold in Daniel 7. That will also be the day that the temple is cleansed, restored, and rededicated. So we'll get to that next week. But notice all the things that Antiochus is doing. When you read that Antiochus decreed and demanded these things, you need to understand that these are the very things that Yeshua is referring to in John chapter 10. This is what he means when he says that his sheep will not follow a stranger. No matter what the threat is, no matter what the law is, no matter what the danger is, no matter how difficult the journey becomes, his sheep hear his voice, and a stranger they will not follow. What does that look like? Well, let me show you what it looked like to be a true follower. In chapter 1, the last 3 verses say this. And many in Israel, we've read about the many in Israel who capitulated, but many in Israel were fully resolved and confirmed in themselves not to eat unclean things. And they chose to die, that they might not be defiled with the meats, and that they might not profane the holy covenant. And they died. That's true sheep. They were resolved and confirmed within themselves. Antiochus made eating pork mandatory as a sign that you had capitulated and were forsaking Torah. There were some in Israel who, when Antiochus commanded them to eat the swine's flesh, there were some in Israel who said, as Peter would later say in Acts chapter 10, "Not so, sir. Nothing unclean has ever touched my lips." And they refused, even at the threat of death, to eat that which they were told they had to eat. They were given opportunities to save their lives, but refused them. Why would they refuse to just eat the pork? Because Yeshua said, a stranger's voice they will not follow. They're not going to do what a stranger tells them to do. Now, beginning in chapter 2 of 1 Maccabees, we read about a man named Mattathias, a priest in the town of Modin. I'm going to close by reading just a little bit out of the 2nd chapter. Because we need to know what happens when Antiochus and his men run into this priest who lives in the town of Modin. Listen to verse 15, 1 Maccabees chapter 2, verse 15. And the king's officers that were enforcing the apostasy came into the city of Modin to sacrifice. And many of Israel came to them, and Mattathias and his sons were gathered together. And the king's officers answered and spoke to Mattathias, saying, "You're a ruler, you're an honorable and a great man in this city, and you're strengthened with sons and relatives. Now therefore, come first and do the command of the king, as all the nations have done, and the men of Judah have done, and those who remain in Jerusalem." All of Jerusalem is now doing this. "And you and your house will be in the number of the king's friends, and you and your sons will be honored with silver and with gold and with many gifts." And Mattathias answered and said with a loud voice, "If all the nations that are in the house of the king's dominion listen to him, though each one fall away from the worship of his fathers, and have made choice to follow the king's commands, yet I and my sons and my relatives will walk in the covenant of our fathers." I don't care if the whole world's doing what you told them to do, I will not. Heaven forbid that we should forsake the law and the ordinances. Listen to this right here now. We will not listen to the king's words to go aside from our worship on the right hand or to the left. My sheep will not listen to the voice of a stranger. Mattathias said, we will not hear, we will not listen to what that wicked king Antiochus has to say. Verse 27, and Mattathias cried out in the city with a loud voice, saying, whoever is zealous for the law and maintains the covenant, let him come after me. And he and his sons fled into the mountains and forsook all that they had in the city. He made a stand that day and said, this is where I draw the line, right? A stranger's voice he would not follow. He and his sons would later lead a revolt that's going to retake Jerusalem, cleanse and rededicate the temple to Yahweh. We need to know the truth that if we can cave into pressure and persecution, we need to know the truth of presented by Hanukkah and the truth presented by John 10, that if we can be made to cave into pressure and to cave into persecution, Yeshua is saying, you're not my sheep. His sheep refuse, no matter what, to follow a stranger. Our Messiah said this in Matthew 24, verse 9. Then shall they deliver you up. So he doesn't whitewash this thing for us, folks. He says, then shall they deliver you up to be afflicted. They shall kill you. You shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake. And then shall many be offended, and shall betray one another, and shall hate one another. And many false prophets shall rise and deceive many. And because iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold. But he that shall endure to the end, the same shall be saved. Notice Yeshua didn't say those who got offended and betrayed and hated, those who were deceived and those whose love waxed cold would be saved anyway. He didn't say that. He said those who endure to the end, who refuse to get offended, who refuse to betray the Messiah, who refuse to let their love wax cold, those who endure to the end shall be saved. So Hanukkah is our yearly reminder that we have a responsibility to stand firm, unmovable, and unshakable in our resolve to keep Torah. Hanukkah is our yearly reminder that many have suffered greatly that you and I could have access to the truth. Had the Maccabees not done what they did, you and I would have never known who the Messiah was.
That's right.
Well, now it's our responsibility to make sure that those who come behind us also have access to truth.
Yeah.
A few weeks ago, I stopped to fill my truck up with gasoline, and I encountered a couple there that I hadn't seen in 15, 17 years. It's been a long time. They used to be very active, vital part of our congregation. They were great people with a great family. But they chose to leave. They departed. They went back to the denominational setting that they had been used to. That day at the gas pump, we talked briefly. We hugged. We exchanged smiles. We caught up a little bit. What's going on in your life? Those sorts of things. But days later, I found myself thinking about them again. And I felt sorry for them. I grieved for them. My heart began to ache for them because I realized they don't even have a clue what they've missed. Though our journey has not been an easy one, Boy, it's been a glorious one. And they don't know what they missed because they didn't continue in the journey. They don't know the truths that the Ruach has revealed to us. They don't know the joys of the Moedim. They don't know the benefits of keeping the Sabbath. They don't know the benefits of eating according to divine instruction. They don't know the joy of knowing what it truly means to walk as He walked. They don't know what they missed because they chose to leave. Now, I'm not saying that anytime anybody leaves this assembly, they messed up. Could be they did, but not necessarily that they messed up if they left. But I am saying that anytime anyone leaves an assembly that is teaching Torah, to return to a place that is doing the exact same thing as Antiochus, they're making a huge mistake. What do I mean when I say to return to a place where they're doing the same thing as Antiochus? What kind of things did Antiochus do? He said, don't circumcise, don't worship on Sabbath, don't refuse to eat pork, don't refuse to participate in our holy days, don't keep your holy days, don't read or follow Torah. Those are the things that he was doing. That's the exact same thing that mainstream denominations are teaching today.
That's right.
They're teaching the same message as Antiochus. You can eat whatever you want to. You can celebrate any holiday you want to. But you need to forsake the Sabbath. You need to forsake the Moedim. You need to turn from Torah. That's nothing but bondage. Set it aside. Don't read it. Don't have anything to do with it. That's the message that Antiochus preached, and churches today are preaching the same thing. And to go back to that is to make a grave mistake. In the words of the book of Maccabees, if you go back to that, you're selling yourself to do evil. In the words of the Maccabees, if you go back to that, you make your soul abominable with uncleanness. If you go back to that, in the words of Messiah in John chapter 10, you just revealed that you are not one of His sheep, because His sheep will not follow a stranger. His sheep hear His voice, and the voice of a stranger they will not follow. Not only will they not follow it, but when they hear it, they run from it. When you think about it in those terms, any suffering that we go through is not worthy to be compared with the glory that's being revealed in us. You agree?
Yes.
Yeah. Hallelujah. That's laying the groundwork. Next Sabbath we're going to talk more about Hanukkah, but more than talk about it, we're going to celebrate it. Yahweh bless you and keep you. Yahweh make His face shine upon you and be gracious to you. Yahweh lift up His countenance upon you and give you peace. As His name is put upon you, so shall He Himself bless you. Amen.